Right.
So welcome everyone to Tartariaaustralia. We have got a super interesting, fascinating show today. So I'm going to welcome all of our guests, starting with Campbell, the co-host. And we are welcoming the amazing, very revered Evan and Stephen Strong today. They have been very influential in my understandings of history and obviously coming from Australia. So thank you for joining us today. I think this may actually be an unprecedented conversation to actually have live. So thank you so much. And Lee, thank you for organizing this. You have your own amazing work going on. I've been tuning into your clips recently. So everyone, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourselves in any capacity? Say anything. Otherwise, I'm just going to hit you with some straight into it conversation.
Let's go straight into it.
Yeah, let's jump into it.
Us talking about ourselves. We don't really like doing that anyways. Let's just talk about things you want to talk about, and we're happy to go there.
Great. Well, I'm like, first of all, I thought I would just get Campbell maybe to introduce a summary, or together we'll introduce a summary of the premise of what Tartaria is. Okay. And then just sort of like start talking from there. So do you want to intro it a bit, Campbell?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So Tartaria is basically a country that was it's been omitted from the history books. So that's why this whole sort of niche is called Tartaria. Is because, we've come across all these maps and all these references and books talking about Tartaria. And of course, we told it was just a region where the Tartars lived, but we've found King's List, we've got flags, we've got Navy flags. So it was a real country, and we've got all the maps, and it was basically wiped out. You see the maps, and it at one point was quite large, and it just sort of gets smaller and smaller and then disappears around the sort of early 1800s. And of course, we've never been taught about it, right? It's been literally wiped from the history books. So that's sort of the first thing that the first topic. The second topic that sort of comes along with it is what's known as the mud flood. And again, it's just a term, we're not sure exactly what it is, but it's the phenomenon of sunken buildings that we see all over the earth. They're everywhere, and they basically have windows that go into the ground. You only see half a window popping up, and they have stairs going up to the front door. So it's like the building is, you've got half a level sunk. So you've got to walk up to the level above, and there's half a level below. And of course, then we've discovered, underground tunnels, and, there's a whole world underground pretty much at the moment. And that led into the architecture, and which is we're going to touch on today with Australia. Is in Australia, we have all these amazing old world buildings built in the 1800s, and they are basically exactly the same as buildings we find in Europe, Africa, Asia, the USA, everywhere. They're all the same. All the Capitol buildings are all the same. They all have similar features, the domes, the columns, the porticos, all this kind of stuff. And then another, I guess, major topic would be star forts. Which is, have you heard of star forts? Have you looked? So star forts are, again, they're everywhere, and they call them bastion forts as well. So the story is that they were built as defensive forts by the Italians and French around the 1500s to the early 1700s. And they sort of say they built, maybe 100 or so, but we've now found these star forts everywhere. They're in Australia, they're in the USA, Africa, and like we've literally tracked more than 5,000 of them on Google Earth. They're everywhere, and it's part of a system. Then we've discovered that these star forts, they're not really forts, but these stars, and they're called stars because they're literally all shaped like stars. They can be 5-sided, 6-sided, 7-sided, or pointed, and they're all attached to cities, big walled cities. And when you look into it, you find these cities are all the major cities: Paris, London. Every major city has a star fort in it, and was what we're calling was a star city, which is basically a city attached to a star fort. So that we've basically uncovered, just looking into this whole underlaying of a culture and a civilization that was clearly across the whole earth, clearly was building the same kind of technology, the same infrastructure, and we've got remnants of it, but we're not told anything about it. all we've got is just this physical evidence everywhere, and we're pretty much trying to piece it all together, what is going on. But clearly what we know is, his story is not our story, right? His story is written by the winners. So it's all been changed, and we're just trying to rediscover what's been hidden.
And that was great, Campbell. And I should also add, Australia is of particular interest because we obviously have this history we've been told that is literally, take the Indigenous history out of it, but the white man is 200 years old, roughly speaking. And the Tartarian history counteracts that, because the buildings that we have here, I'm in Melbourne, all throughout Melbourne are classically Tartarian. And basically, if you go through the history society reference points on, say, like the exhibition centre here in Melbourne, it was built in 1 year with before the invention of electricity, light bulbs and power tools. And today we can't mimic this sort of architecture. So what that says to us is that literally Melbourne was here before we were. And the cities that make up Flinders Street Station, Parliament, State Library, I mean, countless buildings just here in Melbourne City. You know the ones. So they are really ornate, beautiful. They all have massive, giant doorways, huge columns, giant arched windows, towers, steeples, bells, beautiful facades that we do not mimic today in any concept. In fact, our architecture today is like ridiculous comparatively. So even today we couldn't build it. So basically that would then lead to the concept that 200 years ago, Melbourne wasn't founded. It was found dead. Literally, it was found and dug out of the mud, which then I would like to bring into the dialogue with you guys of, if that is the case, then are there any reference points at all in all of your understandings with the Indigenous knowledge that there were actually city structures here in Australia before we landed in Australia? And plus I will add one more premise, which is all of this is built by giants. Like these are literally built, we are literally living on the tops of buildings that are huge, huge doorways, huge windows, huge archways. They're giant architectural structures that do not fit the size of us today. So that's the premise.
Okay. All right. In answer to your question, I can't say that what we found in the past has got the label you've got, but we have found things in the past that don't fit. That's basically what we've been doing. In relation to dreaming stories and evidence of earlier civilizations, the answer to that indirectly is no, none. But that's that's the direct answer. The indirect answer is not that clear. And let me explain why. I think Evan knows where we're going to start this, don't you?
Yeah.
All right. So when we go to Sydney, and when the first fleet came in, it's not well known, but it is known in universities too. There were 3 paintings done of Pinch Gut Island, which is an island in the middle of Sydney where they put a fort in later. And those paintings, and we've seen them, have a 90-metre obelisk that was on top of that particular island. So look, I'm not saying something that we've made up. This is actually paintings and drawings we've seen by the accredited state or country artists that were chosen by the authorities to depict Australia. And to begin with, you've got to remember, before photographs, all our information is through paintings. So it's fascinating how we take a lot of the paintings and say, yeah, that's right, that's right, that's right. But the 3 we know of that were done of the obelisk are basically never discussed. So yes, they're there. Were there earlier civilizations in Australia? Absolutely. That's really not even debatable. We do know a story, and we'll have to be careful about this one.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what I'm going to talk about, don't you? We know the story of a group of people, we won't say who because it will give up who they are, that worked with archaeologists throughout Australia for quite some time, and they take a whole group in, they'll take in everything, portable toilets, tents, the whole thing. And they will do all the grunt work for the archaeologists while they go on to country. Now, we know this because we met the guy that runs the whole thing, but we're not going to give his name up because he gave us information that relates to what you're talking about. And he actually came to us out of frustration and anger about the fact he'd been in the country with archaeologists, I'm afraid they weren't telling the whole truth. And why he came to us is because time after time he had been in the middle. On one occasion, they found the remains of an ancient civilization, and he still got the photographs of them. And the whole day they were looking at this stuff. It's somewhere in the desert, and it's just bits and pieces, but it shouldn't be anywhere. And at the end of the day, they sat around the campfire and they got the archaeologists drunk first. Because it's the only way they're going to get the truth out of them.
Yeah.
And then they brought it up and said, okay, what are we going to do about this? And they said, nothing. Absolutely nothing. We are not going to follow this through. There's nothing we're going to do about this. We've seen this stuff before. It is not on our radar, and you will not be talking about it, because you've got to remember, this is why I'm doing this. This organization is funded by the federal government, right? So I don't want to get them into troubles, but I can talk in secondhand information, what I've been told. Now, these guys are the real deal. They work with all the universities, don't they, mate? Yeah. And they are the ones, if you want to go inland and you've got no money, they'll do the whole thing for free, because they're sponsored by the federal government. I won't say why or how, because that gets too close to the quick. He was so frustrated, and he knew that we'd found a skull that doesn't belong anywhere. And he actually wanted to go there. So they went to the federal government, and they went to a university, of which we won't name, and it was set up. It was going to happen. They were going in there to find this skull. It's not a hominid, not a Homo sapien, doesn't come from here. And then a professor stepped in the day before, and the whole thing was called off. So yes, we know of the fact there were ancient civilizations. Now, I can't give you a label to that. I can only give you a presence, because obviously at this stage, I haven't seen the photographs. And after what happened, because he said he was going to find out why we got blocked to see that skull, and he was going to fix it up. And he rang me up once, didn't he?
Yep.
He was onto it. He was going to fix it up, and he'd get back to me soon. About a year and a half ago, wasn't
it?
Yeah. Of course, he couldn't get back to us because he's funded. So look, all credit to that gentleman, because he was trying to do the right thing, but got rolled. So yes, now here's the trick with this. Why is it that the original people of today do not have stories about this particular civilization, these buildings, and all the artifacts we've got? Now, the artifacts we've got, the rocks we've got, cannot be identified at any area in Australia, because the technology and archaeology, the technology and the markings, the temperatures used, which go into thousands and thousands of degrees, the cuts that were done with the finest blades possible, do not belong to stick, stone and bone technology. Now, what you need to understand, that Australia is unlike other civilizations, we believe, around about 10 to 12,000 years ago. There was the decision made by the original people to walk away from the technology that was rife and rampant through the whole of Australia. Whether that's linked into Lemuria or whether it's linked into Tartaria, I can't say. All we deal with is the end results. But I mean, we're doing a show, I think not next week, the week after, and it's solely based on the rocks. Now, the rocks have been seen by the Australian Museum. They then threatened to take me to court, didn't they? Mind you, I've been threatened to go to court now by the Australian government so many times now, it's more than with one hand. And they know those rocks do not fit in. Have we found artifacts in Australia that do not belong to stick, stone and bone technology? More than we can count. They're everywhere. I mean, we had a phone call yesterday, didn't we, Evan?
Yes.
Another rock, a stunning piece of work, and all the lines are perfectly geometrically shaped so that they're perfectly straight, 180 degrees, no deviation, no kink. I've got one rock that has about 150 lines, and every line on it is perfectly straight. Now, original people don't do geometry and straight line and precisions like that in their art, in anything now. Did they in the past? Yes. Was there technology in this country that is at least the equal of the best of what we have today? Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got one rock there, which we're going to talk about further on, that has a perfect map of Australia Borealis, which is interesting because you can't see it, can you?
No, you can't see it by the eye. You can only see it through a telescope.
Yeah, Dr. Derek Cunningham from England saw the markings and said that's exactly the same as Corona Borealis, which is in the northern hemisphere, and it's exactly the same markings. Now, the point is that you can't see that star system unless you've got a telescope. But this rock is 10,000 years old. Another rock we've got, we know, because of where it was found, is at least 15,000 years old, and you would be flat out today doing what they did on that rock. So, yes, the government knows about this because they've written to us on, I think, 5 different occasions.
I think it's about 5.
5 formal letters threatening to put me in jail, and probably close to 100 emails reminding me that they're going to put me in jail. And late last year, they sent me a letter, didn't they, Evan?
Last year, year before, no. It was just before Christmas anyway.
Right, yeah. And it was called a letter, what is it? Notice of warning, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where they said they have enough information to put me in jail and lock me up for 3 years and fine me $1 million. They've said that every time. But they have decided they will not take me to court, but they then reserve the right at any time in the future to take me back to court, depending on how I behave. So why would I get these letters? Because all of the things we found do not fit into the embrace of any stick, stone and bone technology, but they are tens of thousands, or maybe even hundreds of thousands of years old. So the solution is, in everything we do, I mean, you haven't got one, have you?
No.
No, I've had my Anasio agent since 2015, and I know a professor rang him once and asked him about what he was going to do with me. And he said, simple, put him in jail and lock away the key, or throw the key away. That's their job. Now, I haven't done anything against the law. Nothing whatsoever, but that doesn't change the fact they want to put me in jail and lock away the key. Now, I've got some skulls at the moment, which, they've actually got part of it here. I'll show it to you now. Here's a part of the makeup for the skull. Can you see the forehead? There isn't one. Now, this skull has a 1,800 cc, ours is 1,300, it's 500 cc greater. It has massive eyes, but it has no forehead. See how far that's the straight way the face is. Now, we've got it made up as a complete skull. That's been done too. And when that was done, that's when I got a letter from the government saying they're not going to take me to court anymore, because if they did, I'd walk in with this and say, this is what I found, but they won't let us tell the world. So what they've done is I've got an official letter from them. And what it tells me is this: I'm allowed to keep these bones in our house. But if I take them out the front door, I go to jail. If they're analysed or tested, I go to jail. So yes, we have a lot of different evidence that tells us in Australia, and a long, long time ago, there was something going on in this country that doesn't fit anything of today. So therefore, if you're looking for information about, say, those rocks, there was one elder, wasn't it, Kano?
Yeah.
He knew the story of the rock, and he told me that dreaming story. To my knowledge, that's the only original person I've met in this country ever that knows anything about the archaeology we have today. So it's a long answer, but the answer is no. There are no stories about that, but you've got to remember that the stories that we're hearing today from the original people come from a technology that's been thrown away, where they're basically naked sadhus that in Tasmania, they even gave up the knowledge of making fires. Well, for God's sake, mate, they are no longer interested in technology. They're walking away from all of it. They saw it as a gift and a burden, and the burden was too great. So no, there is not stories, but evidence everywhere.
That is so interesting, Cam. I'm sure you have so much to say there.
There you go. Yeah.
But like the idea that there was a timeline where they actually decided to walk away, because from the Tartarian timeline, this was like the highest advanced, technologically advanced civilization, but unified and working with high frequency, high sound, somatic frequency technology. But there was an alternative, I guess I'm going to say force, Campbell, you probably have another word for it, that was pushing up against that. And interesting with the Tartarian architecture, I'll just mention this, is that everything's built out of red brick. And it looks to us that Australia has been desolated at some point. The whole of the inland of Australia is red desert. Now, it's really interesting though, because from the Tartarian consciousness perspective, the earth is flat. So that's number one. We're not talking interdimensionally here or of different versions of the energetics of that, but the plane is flat with a firmament, and that firmament holds a flat earth, so to speak. So land masses are essentially, a lot of our land masses are either melted civilizations that have taken such a heat blast that they've melted into potentially something that would look like rock, or shattered or cut down trees, giant trees, that would look like a mountainous plateau, or the sharded plateaus of, say, the Himalayas. And then you've got quarrying going on, which is digging out these canyon-like, and what we would now know as our ocean, the bottom of our ocean landscapes, which has created this concept of mountains, hills, canyons, oceans. Now, from that perspective, Australia has had an event take place, and we are now have this red desert, and this sense of this red is exactly the same red as the brick. So whether or not there was an event in Australia, what I'm saying in summary, a long time ago, before where we're coming in, which is like 1800s, like long time ago, that decimated what was here. So Campbell, go for it.
Yes. Gosh, I've got all my questions. That is interesting that you say they walked away from technology. Yeah. I mean, that's, I could almost envisage that happening in the next 5 or 10 years again. Because look what they've done to it, right? But that a big part of the architecture that we look at looks like it was, these buildings weren't necessarily buildings. That we look at them more as machines, like free energy machines. They all have the big domes that are made of copper. They have big spires going up. We know that there's free energy the higher you go up. They're all basic, grounded. You find all these strips going down. It's got a lot to do with geometry, all this stuff. But it looks like it was integrated and sort of beneficial to mankind. But sometime, at least a couple of 100 years ago, something's happened. We don't know. What happened to the center of Australia, but it's the same as what you see in the Middle East around Sodom and Gomorrah. You see it all across the Sahara, and the Sahara is, of course, it's like the whole Sahara is full of old cities and castles that are just smashed. So it looks like, some big events going on, and whether that's like a plasma event from the sky, like a natural sort of plasma discharge that's gone on, or whether it's something more like a Jew weapon, like an actual attack. We're not sure, but what it looks like is there was a society running and something's happened, and either we've been attacked and lost, or it's been natural and someone's, the people that rule us now that are keeping all the secrets, they've just come in and sort of taken over. And here we find ourselves, and we don't sort of know where we are, who we are, what our past or history is. And of course, like you say, the government are willfully hiding this, and we know that, that fraternity, right? Those, I don't know, can I say it? Yeah. Those free people who like masonry, the Freemasons. We say that they're called that because they came to all these cities, right? And what did they find? Free masonry, free buildings, and they took it all.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because when you were doing that, both Evan and I were thinking of one site, weren't we?
We were, yeah.
It's the same site, and I probably need to explain. I'll give you the very, very vaguest of details about where it is. It's not far from Sydney.
You might have seen a bit in the TikTok video that Leah put out.
Oh, yeah.
Which one?
Yeah.
There's a lot.
There were so many of them. But yeah, it was featured in one of those.
Yeah, it's called Butterbox. And the trick with Butterbox was we were invited to that site because we don't go onto country unless we're asked by someone, normally an elder, in fact, always an elder. And with Butterbox, it's not like any other site you'll find in Australia. Number one, when we went there, and I asked original people about this site and they said they wouldn't go there. I was taken by a white fella. It's about the only time we had been, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because no black fella goes near it. It's death country. And when we got there was a couple of things we noticed that really stood out. Number one, no birds, no animals. And this is the scary part. No insects, were there? I couldn't find an ant. I couldn't find a fly. And whenever we go on country, we always have bird sign. It's like obligatory. It's like the spirits are welcoming us. And when we got to this particular site, it was not like any site I've been to. There was no life there. And we had 3 women, didn't we, Evan? We'll talk about the 3 women too, won't we?
Yep.
Anyway, so we went to this site for the day and we picked up gutters where you could sit inside them. And I'm made from sandstone. What was interesting, the place we went to has got the softest sandstone there is. You can pick up the rocks there and you can crumble them in your hand to individual grains with no effort. It's called type 4 sandstone because type 1 is like granite and everyone thinks sandstone's the same. Well, I'm sorry, you're just wrong. This stuff is rubbish, but amongst it, we were finding gutters that you could sit inside. We were finding domes. We were finding a structure that was about 30 metres high was broken to sections, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we spent the day looking at this site and it was really obvious the way it was. And we've even found stone pipes with melted slag caught inside the sandstone pipes.
Yeah.
I thought this is amazing. They're melting things here. This is something that's quite advanced. But it was destroyed. And of course, people would say, well, how can you prove that? Number one, because all these things were scattered over about 5 Ks, weren't they?
Yeah.
All over the place, and everything was smashed up. But the main reason I knew there was something wrong with the site is that night, the 3 women that were involved in this all ended up in hospital with exactly the same symptoms. Bleeding, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were coughing up blood.
Coughing up blood,
Wow.
all 3 of the women. They went there this morning, fine, bouncing around. And by that night, they went to different, I think 2 went to one hospital and the other person went to a different hospital, didn't even know each other. And we found out the next day they were all still in hospital in quite serious conditions and they finally recovered. Now, I would say to you, the chances of one person being sick at the site is quite okay. 2 is quite rare. And there's a saying about third time proves it. If 3 different women, we only had 3 women there, if they're all in hospital the next day and they're all bleeding and they're coughing up blood, that's the site. The site, and that's why the original people wouldn't go there, and that's why the birds and the animals and the insects wouldn't go there. And to be honest, we haven't gone back, have we?
No, we haven't. I would like to go back with like a EMF reader,
Geiger counter.
All the gadgets,
Yeah.
just to see what happens.
Yeah, but I knew at the start when I got there and I couldn't see an animal there, I thought, this is not a good site. I knew the elders told me, we're not going there. Good luck. But that was the remains of, that place was blown up. As simple as that, it was blown up. And we did the research on it because some people would say, oh, it's the remnants of buildings from the first settlers. We did a lot of research on this. This place was discovered by the Catholic Walking Club, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
In about 1940. No one had been there before there, for God's sake. No one had even got there. In fact, there's a mountain near there, and I'm not going to say which one because it gives away the location, where if people, when they climbed it, put on a piece of paper and put it in a bottle to say they'd been there. And the earliest date was 1936. So nobody went there. And some people could say it's an abandoned building. Man, it's on the top, in the Blue Mountains, on the very top where you can see in every direction, and you couldn't grow a thing in that soil.
Yeah.
It's just pure grains of sandstone.
How old
So
is it?
that's a place that was fully blown up and destroyed. And what's fascinating is whatever was done to it, that energy's still there. It hasn't gone. So I don't know what they did to it, but I can tell you something, however they blew it up, they did a bloody good job on it, because nothing can live there. No animals live there, and no people should go there. And to be honest, it's a dangerous place to go. And if you're a woman, you wouldn't go there.
Gosh, imagine if it was actually tech that had been trapped underground, still in some of the structure and actually still functioning on some level and emitting a very
been to a site like that too.
Frequency.
Yeah, we've been to a site like that also.
Yeah.
All the trees grow to a certain point
and then
collapse.
Fall down, and all around, and it's like a rectangle of bush. And what happened was, one of our people, his name was Ryan, wasn't it? Ryan Mullins was going through, because we had a map from Klaus Duna to take us to different sites from a more ancient civilization, which he said was 15 k's by 5 across, and it was all buildings there. And we got about 150 hits. And the 5 we went to, we got amazing sites on every occasion. But Andy went to this site, and he got there, and he's walking through the bush, and all of a sudden, you just go into a complete rectangle. It's like someone cut it out, and you've got trees on top of trees on top of trees. You can't walk on the ground. You can't get near there because there's so many dead trees on top. But those same trees, if you go past into any of the 4 corners, everything's perfect. Everything's perfect. But what was interesting with Ryan was, because he was on his own and didn't do ceremony, he nearly died there. He collapsed while he was there and crawled out of the site. When he got out of the site, he started to come good. Okay. And basically what we then did is we went back as a group, and I gave ceremony to the site, and we tried to work out what the hell was going on. Our understanding is there's something underneath that site that's still functioning.
Yeah.
And that's what Klaus was telling us too, because we got back to Klaus about this, Klaus Duna. He's done a lot of work around the world on this sort of stuff. And he said, take a mask next time and make sure it's complete. Don't let any of that air in, because he feels that site is still, whatever's happened to it, whatever energy or what's been placed underneath, is still functioning. There is not one fern, not one anything that can grow on that site. And if it does, you can see a couple of trees that have started to grow, and already they've got a use-by date. You can see they're just dying as they grow. So yes, is there evidence? Absolutely. I'm not prepared to say where it comes from. It may be what you're talking about is right. The same way I'm not prepared to say yes or no to flat Earth, because I don't hold an opinion either way on that. Okay, that's not for us. We've got enough battles to fight without fighting others, to be honest. We keep away from other people's crusades. We've got enough of our own. But what I can tell you is there is copious amounts of evidence that we found and measured and we've charted that proves to us there were far more advanced civilizations in Australia, and for reasons we don't understand, and we've been to one place that gives us a clue, your idea of them being destroyed, certainly something like that's happened in Australia, because we do know the remains of that desert place. They told us then it had been destroyed. The place we went to had been smashed, and that other place I spoke about would be about 40, 50 Ks from the one that's been blown up with the gutters. So it's not just one site on its own. They're all over the place. And you're right. I have no doubt authorities further up the pecking order know of these sites, absolutely know of them, and are doing everything they can to make sure that they never do get known.
Well, I mean, the people still in power would be the descendants of those who conquered or the land in the first place, wouldn't they? Really? So they're hiding, they're keeping the secret to keep the power.
Oh, absolutely. We do know, for example, that one of the people we're working with, Nina Angelo, bailed up, who was it? Julia Gillard, didn't she? And she made out that she'd be interested in this, and I don't know, may well have been the case, and she may have been actually quite pure about this, but it never came to anything. But we do know that this is known of at the highest levels of both state and federal government. And I mean, as I said, it's 2015, isn't it? I've had him for 5 years, haven't I?
You have, yes.
Yeah, I've had my agent for 5 years now. I don't even know what he looks like, and I know where he lives. And if you're watching today, how are you, mate?
Well, I mean, it's a fascinating conversation because, okay, so if we look at the idea of some of the land masses in our desert, and we've got some really interesting ones there. I mean, most people perceive Australia as because it's like flat plain, but in actual fact, there's so many canyons and so many ridges, but obviously like known to the whole world is the Olgas and Ayers Rock. Now, in what you've sort of like through your research, would there be a fair premise involved that there is a vast underground remaining structure under something like Ayers Rock?
No, I don't think it's under Ayers Rock, to be honest. But are there underground structures?
Yes.
Yeah, we know of one. And we do know it's guarded, don't we, Evan?
Yes.
In fact, we know a person who was going to go into that cave where the rumor was there was an underground crystal city.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be too specific.
I think one of our elders talked about a city of steeples.
That's right, a city of steeples, yeah. We actually know where the entrance is, and it's guarded by a farmer. And I can tell you a story about a real estate agent who told us what happened. He actually went up to this farmer and said, I want to go up through that. He came to look at his property, right? And he said he wanted to sell it. But then he said, I've heard about that cave up the top, and I'd like to go and have a look. He said, you can't go there. He said, why not? He said, because you're not allowed to go there. He said, but that's not on your land. He said, yeah, but you've got to get through my land to get to it. And he said, well, I'm going to go and have a look. He said, no, you're not. And he said, well, what's going to stop me? He said, me, I'll shoot you and I'll kill you. And he stopped and looked at him. He said, what are you talking about? He said, I've been given permission. If anyone goes up there, I've been given permission. I'll shoot you and kill you. And don't you worry about it, because I'll come and clean it up. And no one will know where you've been. Now, our elders have told us about this site. We've been told that there's beings that run in and out from there all the time. And we know exactly where that site is. And it's part of a series of tunnels that run at least 80 Ks. And I have been told by one elder, it runs from where we are, which is near Byron Bay, to Sydney in a continuous tunnel. Now, I can't prove that, but I have been told that. But I can tell you one thing, the story about this guy with the gun, and he said, I've shot people and killed them and they've been cleared up. That came to me from a real estate agent who's quite well known in the area, isn't he? And they all think he's a bit wild and a bit crazy. But yeah, that particular, we've known about that for quite some time. I went to that site 25 years before. And that's what started me in archaeology. It's in the same place. And I stumbled upon some things then that shouldn't have been there, and I'm not allowed to talk about them. And that's what started us on this occasion, because we knew that what I was looking at, that's not original. In fact, even a lady called Isabel McBride, that's right, she discovered part of it, and it was a track, a road, not a track, a road. And I've seen it. And it's got gutters and it's got a camber, and it's about 2 meters across. And I walked over an aqueduct. By the way, original people don't build aqueducts. And I walked to the main part of this, and we found a brush box tree that was growing on top of that track. And the brush box tree was 8.4 meters in girth. And according to the loggers there, that makes it 600 years old. So it wasn't made by Europeans. This is on the side of a 45-degree sloped hill. And it was built to go into this cave from another angle where people lived. And when a bulldozer fell over the top of it and went through into the cave in 1962, they called it Gracie's Temple. Now, white fellas, when they fall into a black fella's cave, even if it's religious, they don't call it a temple. And they said it went forever inland. And it was found then. And McBride went across to look at it because they found it. And she did say in her report, there was nothing like this in Australia. I don't understand what it is. I rang her and asked for permission to go and pick the site up and continue with it, and got that permission. And we found it runs through the whole of the side of the mountain. It's on a level that's scary to walk on, for God's sake, let alone build a road on, but it's there. we also know there's a cave in there, don't we, Evan?
We do.
And we nearly got to that one too. So look, in Australia, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. In Australia, the evidence of anomalies is absolutely massive.
Mm-hmm.
But what tends to happen, unless you want to risk being threatened with all sorts of things, is you just don't say anything. You let it go. If you're an archaeologist, they told them on the night, there's an unwritten law. When we find this stuff, we forget it when we leave the site and we don't go back. And that's what we're going to do. That's why these guys come to see us. They couldn't do, anyway, they couldn't change it anyway. So yeah, what it belongs to, who owns it, that's debatable, but it's there. That's not debatable.
I mean, when we look at all the concept of the Freemasons, their whole thing was architecture and buildings. Their whole thing was to do, the clue was in the buildings, in the architecture. And like when we start to look at Australia's architecture and then pitch it to our 200 inverted comma year history of the white man narrative, like it completely blows the story out of the water. Like there's so much evidence against it. So that leads me to the next trippy part of this premise, which was around about 200, 300 years ago, we had this event, this current event, and there's been a few, but this current event, which is termed, as you know, the mud flood, which basically across the whole plain and buried everything. And then we start to see these pictures, these photographs of all of our most renowned cities of the world, like, you know, London, Rome, like every major hub, and they have huge mudded streets, huge mudded roads. They're all built up like the scene behind me, and there's no people, zero people. And this is around 1800. No people, no people, no people. Now, someone was there taking these photographs, but apart from the person taking the photo, or the thing that was taking the photograph, could have been a drone for all we know. Like literally, there's no photos. And then suddenly, in like a 20 to 30 years after that, all these people start to repopulate these city centers. And so that, and then we get these stories of the convicts arriving and populating Australia. That narrative makes zero sense. We get this whole narrative about orphan trains, where hundreds of thousands of children were basically exported around the world, who apparently had no parents. And then we have this Freemason, you know, spread across the whole world as if they were the micromanagers, the managers of this process. So from the Tartarian perspective, all images we have of all of these buildings being built are all very vague images, with all the skies are always white, nothing in the skies, like they've been deleted somehow. But they've got scaffolding around them, but it's all the deconstruction from the top down. So it looks like they're just always deconstructing all the towers, all the technology, all the bells, and all the bells got confiscated across the realm in like between World War I and World War II. Yep. So all the bells removed from all the towers. So that's part of the technology. So if we look at Australia specifically, it means that in about 200 years ago, humanity was reset and was actually manually repopulated and redistributed across the plain. And then with that, and then our history was told to us. We were programmed into this narrative that like, this is what our history is. Somewhere in there, 1,000 years of time was added to our history timeline that's false. Yep. And then we've got this sense in there that then they all timed with the World Trade Fairs, which are these interesting massive events that were happening all over the plain. Basically, we didn't even have power or light bulbs at this point, and these huge trade fairs. And interesting is how tying it into Australia, then all these native cultures were rolled out as part of these trade fairs, introduced to the new population. At the same time, they had baby incubators at these trade fairs, introducing babies to the population. And then on top of all of that, we have these huge, magnificent structures that, like a week after the trade fair, they always burn down, and there's a total demolishing of that area. And the history books say they're just built out of plaster.
But some are still standing.
So then we've got to look at the question of, okay, if our history is completely falsified and we've been completely reset and reprogrammed, then what is our Indigenous history alongside that? Because there's going to be a section of our Indigenous history that had exactly the same experience. They were redistributed, repopulated, reprogrammed with their version of the narrative as the contrasting story to ours. But then alongside that is the third area, which is there were an original people that seemed to escape this whole reset, reprogramming modality and somehow lived still in alignment with, light source, unified nature, our original people. So any thoughts on any of that? that was a big summary.
Massive play. I mean, we do have the stolen generation, of
and
course.
The stolen
as well.
generation, of course, and massive reprogramming there.
Look, I can't, I'm not going to say you're right or wrong about what happened in other places. I can only restrict myself to what happened in Australia. And my suggestion would be, if that did happen, you've got to remember the original people have already made a decision not to be part of this.
Yeah.
So my understanding is what we have in Australia is continuous. That's why we're finding bones that go back. I mean, like the ones I've got, that one I just showed you, we know for a fact that's got to be 60,000 years old, because that where it was buried was on a ridge that would have overlooked the Murray River when it was there, before the Cadell Fault moved it 2 kilometres, and that was 60,000 years ago. But there's a burial site there that would have been facing the river. So we believe that what took place in Australia has nothing to do with the rest of the world. I think Australia is separate in a lot of different respects. It was the last continent to be stolen back. America was the second last, and they left us alone. You've got to remember, the Egyptians were in Australia for 4,200 years. The Phoenicians were here. The Spanish were here. All different beings have been here at different times and have stayed for a while and left and been asked to leave on each occasion. When the British came, they were asked to leave too, but they wouldn't go. Every other group did. We know the Egyptians were here until 400 years ago, and I have an elder who told me when they left, why they were thrown out and why they were told not to come back. So what happens before then, I don't know. But in Australia, that was their story out there. Ours is different. Yes, there were earlier civilizations here. Yes, a lot of it was blown up and exploded. That's definite. But the mechanics of that was a long time ago. And in Australia, we weren't part of the rest of the world until they came to us in the 1800s. Basically, before that, we weren't part of anything. So what they were doing out there wasn't our story. So yeah, I get what you're saying, and I've got a friend of ours we work with a lot for a long time. His name is Shane Curl, and I can tell you that everything you've said, he said it, hasn't he?
Yes.
I'm fully behind all the stuff you're talking about. And look, I don't, for the flat Earth thing, I don't really gel with that. But what I've learned to do is, unless I know something is true, everything's possible. And the very few things I know about are the fact that I've got original skulls with original artifacts, and they're ancient. And they tell me that at some stage in this place, they adopted everything that we have today and walked away from it. I know they did that, and I know why they did that. And then the rest of the world, they did what they did. And we deliberately made sure nobody came here. People say, oh, we didn't travel out. We traveled out to everywhere. But no one was allowed to come in. I mean, the Egyptians came for a while and then they were banned. They were the only group that had a period of tenure here.
Are we allowed to ask why they were banned?
Yes, I do. I do know why. Well, I didn't ask. I was told by Wallengarry, who's a famous regional culture man that still lives in Sydney, doesn't he?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Wallengarry told me what happened. See, they started, there's a story up in Carryong where they first came, and that was 4,600 years ago when Khufu was in control and 2 of his sons came in. And they had a concord on agreement where they could come to Australia and be tutored in the spiritual and mystical and magical realms. We didn't do the other stuff. We walked away from it. And that was fine. They were allowed to stay. They were welcomed. They could do their lifestyle and do their farming if they wanted. We didn't interfere with that. But 400 years ago, a group of Egyptians came to Australia, and they stopped. Their boat stopped at Balmoral Beach in Sydney. I was told that by the elder. And if you go to Sydney from Egypt, you go inland. That's where you go. And they went into the middle. I can't say where, but when they went into the middle, they stole 4 of the sacred rocks I've been talking about that we had. Now, I don't know if you understand how much original people regard these rocks, mate. That's just like breaking into the Sistine Chapel and stealing the artifacts. So the warriors tracked them all the way back to Sydney, followed them all the way there. And when they got to the beach, they speared and killed all of them. And they told the Egyptians in the boat, you've broken the Concord, you've broken the Makarrata, you've broken the treaty. You are no longer welcome. You can never come back to this country. So the Egyptians left 400 years ago, or whatever the date is, because you could be give or take on that. And soon after, the British came and we told them to leave and they wouldn't. Because when the British came, they brought 11 ships and they were basically full of, not convicts, soldiers with guns. You've got to get this straight. Everyone thinks, oh, the first fleet was full of convicts. Crap.
Yep, crap.
There was an army there. They knew what they were coming to. Cook knew when he actually put the flag up. He wasn't allowed to. And in the flag, it said they were there. They knew they were there. And when they came, they raised the flag, and the actually instructions, I've read them, said you're not supposed to until you get approval, and they never did. When they came, they knew there were people here, and they knew they had to take it off, and they knew it was a war. Now, I've read reports, and that war, what people don't know, we nearly lost the war in 1796. Pemulwuy had taken Parramatta and Toongabbie and burnt it to the ground. He'd actually attacked them the day before with a brilliant guerrilla attack. What had happened was the troopers had been out for 6 weeks looking for Pemulwuy because the whole of Australia was scared shitless of Pemulwuy. And what happened was that Pemulwuy could speak the language in 3 weeks, and he was actually taken to Phillip, and he was asked to dine with him at the morning teas for the first 4 years until he realised that this was a con. They declared war on the British in 1792, and in 1796, half the garrison was based in Parramatta and half was based in Sydney. And they'd been out for 3 weeks trying to find Pemulwuy and found no one, but he knew what they were like. And what had happened is the day before, all the warriors, because Toongabbie and Parramatta were basically 2 large streets. And what they'd done is the nights before, they'd buried themselves into the sides of those streets out in the bush and had stayed there for a night and waited for Pemulwuy. And when the troopers come in the afternoon, he knew what they did. They always went straight for the rum. And as they were dismounting, he started to walk down the main street with 2 spears in his hand. He stood about 6'4" and his crow coat. And a lot of people saw him. And when they saw him, the troopers were fully armed. They screamed and ran away. But he had 2 guys. There were 2 guys there. One was called Patterson or somebody, and also the Surgeon General. Pemulwuy picked up his 2 spears, threw one at the Surgeon General and killed him outright, and killed Patterson outright. He was the only one trooper there that he feared. Well, the rest panicked, and then they picked up their guns and tried to shoot him. What then happened was all of the original people were on 2 sides of the street, and they just started throwing spears over the houses into the road. And the story is, and this is from the official records, within 2 minutes, of the garrison of 150, 43 were mortally wounded, and they retreated. They couldn't fight them. They couldn't see them. They started shooting each other. They were shooting each other because it was in dusk. They couldn't see the blackfellas except Pemulwuy just stood there, and you shoot at him, but you can't kill him. They just couldn't hit him. It was like Crazy Horse in America. He did the same thing. So what happened was they retreated to the fort, but the fort was made of wood. So what Pemulwuy and his warriors did is they burnt down all the houses. They basically burnt Toongabbie and Parramatta down to the ground. And then the warriors said, let's burn down the fort. Well, what had happened is one trooper had left and raced back to Sydney. Sydney was in a state of chaos. They were racing towards the beaches to get on the boats. They weren't going to fight. They were too scared of him because there had been a lot of things that happened before, and they thought he was unkillable. So what happened was they surrounded the fort, and this is the report that was put up by Eric Wilmot, who is the, I think it's the Chancellor of James Cook University, isn't it? First blackfellow to do that. He's the one who wrote the book called Pemulwuy the Rainbow Warrior. And this is all based on what took place. Then what happened was Pemulwuy, they had an argument between the warriors because the warriors wanted to burn down Parramatta, then march on Sydney and kill them all. Pemulwuy wouldn't do it. And he told them why. He said, they kill our women and children. In that fort are women and children. Our fight is with the men. We cannot do this. And he told all the warriors to leave. And then what he did was he stood in front of the fort and he waited there until the sun came up, and they stuck their head above and they could see him. And then they'd duck down again and they'd look up again and they'd duck down. And finally they could see it was him. So they shot him and they shot him and they shot him. And they reckon they shot for about 5 minutes before he fell. Well, that changed everything. It got to Sydney that he'd been falling and everyone was cheering and everyone was happy, and they put him on a cart and they drove him down there. And they drove him into Sydney. Philip had a look at him, and the Surgeon General, because they had one left, the other one was dead now, looked at him and said, his lung is full of blood, he will die. I said, great, fantastic, because if Pemulwuy's dead, we can now win the war. By the way, it was a war. This is what I've got to make the point. It was a proper war. So what happened was, and no one could work out why Pemulwuy had done this, but couldn't work out why he stood there and waited to be shot. But he had a plan. His plan was brilliant. Then what happened was, Philip decided, we'll lock him up and we'll put him in the jail, and then I'll get Nargle, who's his cousin, to come and have a look at him and see him in the jail and see he's about to die and tell the rest. So the war's over. Good thinking, he thought. So Nargle went and saw him, and he's laying there. And he's laid on a table with manacles on his arms, on his legs, and on his neck. And I remember I read where the report was, why are you doing this? Philip said, I don't trust him. I know he's about to die, but I don't trust him. Well, what happened was after Nargle left, a song started, and it went on all day and all night for the next 6 days and nights, full stop. And everyone in Sydney was going crazy because they couldn't sleep. It just never stopped. They were singing him back. And then what happened on the 7th night, the song stopped. So in the morning, Philip went in, because the Surgeon General had been in 3 times and said, I don't know why he's still alive. He had about 20 bullets in him and his lungs was punctured. He said, I don't understand why he's alive, but he's going to die any minute. So they went in there, 2 guards out the front. They opened the door. He's gone. 1 crow feather laying on the table. Turned around to the troopers. What have you done? Nothing, nothing. He's gone. After that, it was well known that people were told not to go out at night because Pemulwuy will get you. There were stories of people seeing Pemulwuy 2 days later in Manly, where there was 20 troopers there, all fully mounted. They turned and bolted away. They wouldn't even face him. And remember, Pemulwuy's head was cut off in 1802 when he gave up. He stood in front of the troopers in 1802 out near Currajong somewhere. They bolted and then turned around and saw he stood there, and they inched back again, and then they shot him and shot him and shot him. And he died this time because he didn't want to live. They cut his head off, and the next day it was in a boat called the Speedy going back to England. Yeah. We've asked for that head. They won't give it back. Now, that if they gave it back, you would find that Australia was actually in war, and on that particular battle, if Pemulwuy had behaved like the British would have been defeated in 1796, and there would have been no more British here. But Pemulwuy would not drop himself down to the level of the people who had invaded his country. So, yes, there was a complete war there. In fact, Watkin Tench, who was second in command, wrote to the British time after time and said, declare this a war. We're fighting and losing. Remember, when the attack took place in, I think, in Tasmania, something like 500 whitefellas were killed. And I think they killed about 4 original people during that time because the 6 tribes worked together. They couldn't beat them. They were going to evacuate from Tasmania. People don't know that in 1831, nobody went outside Hobart. They couldn't, or Port Arthur. They were scared. They couldn't go anywhere because they owned nothing. It was like Iraq, where when we were there, Mohammed Karzai could stay in Kabul, but nowhere else. because nothing else was under their control. That's why they got Angus Robertson to go and tell all the blackfellas, lay down your arms and we'll give you half of Tasmania. They gave them Bruny Island, didn't they?
Yes,
And sent them
right.
all off there. And got Truganini, tricked her in convincing them that it's safe to do that. They spent, I think it's 1931, they had the Black Line, where they'd sent out 500 men to bring back all the blackfellas. Lock them all up and bring them back. And they went out there for 5 weeks. It cost them something like £15,000 to do this. That's a lot of money today. And do you know what they came back with? An old man and a young boy. During that time, 5 of the men there had fallen off cliffs and died. So after 5 weeks, 5 of them died and they found 2 people. They couldn't catch them. And they thought, we're going to have to leave. We're going to have to leave Tasmania because we can't farm the land. And then a preacher came along and said, I'll sort this out. I'll tell them, I'll give them the promised land. I'll lie to them. And they came and they laid down there. So they, ladies and gentlemen, there were major wars in this country. And in 2 occasions, if the blackfellas had behaved like whitefellas, we would have lost Tasmania and Australia. But they had more dignity and they had morals and standards, even in warfare, about what you can and can't do. Fighting another man face to face, they're up for that. But harming a child or a woman, nobody would do that in warfare, would they? So that's the real story of Australia. That's part of the story. So my point is this: don't believe this government because they lied about what they said when they got here. They've lied about what they did when they got here. So why would you believe what they told you was here was true?
Exactly. I mean, and yeah, the big thing, like Kel mentioned before with Australia is, you know, if they turned up in 1788 and then they had wars and that, I mean, how long was it before they, you know, I mean, we've got buildings from the 1860s that are massive. So we're meant to believe that, you know, in 60 years, they've built all the industry to build a building. You know, they've got brick factories and glass factories and all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of where we come from is the story doesn't make sense. Like
No, it doesn't, because you've got to remember, do you know why Blaxland, Wentworth and Lawson went across there with the original people? They went there for one reason, and it wasn't to find new land. Do you know why they did this? Because they were, all the convicts were doing runners, weren't they?
Yeah, they're all taking off because they heard a rumour
by the original people that you people have been here before. There are major cities, there are major civilizations in the middle. And therefore, what was happening was, because there's no jail here, all the Irish were doing runners straight away. They just said, well, bugger it, we're going off there. And a lot of them died trying to find it. So what happened was Blaxland, Wentworth and Lawson went across the Blue Mountains, not to find farmland. That wasn't the main reason. It was to convince the convicts there was nowhere to run. Now, that is the truth. That is the main reason they went. And when they got there, they said, there's flat plains where you can run sheep. They said, oh, shit, we'll go across now. But remember, Blaxland, Wentworth and Lawson couldn't get across the Blue Mountains, so they were taken across by blackfellas.
Well, there was a rumour of an inland sea too.
The inland sea, but remember, they were running to buildings.
Yeah.
Now, this is the beauty of this. Original people, and myself included, because I'm original, we are shocking with time. We tend to talk about the past as a future, and therefore they're telling this mob, what are you hanging around here for? You got your spot in the middle, go back there. And that, if you check the records, you will find that was said commonly. They were losing so many of the Irish, particularly, because the Irish hate the English anyway, right? They're all being chucked down here. Well, they were just doing runners straight away. A lot of them joined up. What was that guy that joined up with Pemulwuy? It was his name's, big. It was a big giant guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, forget his name now. He led an insurrection there. They were told, you've got an inland city. What are you doing here? Why are you being treated like that? Leave these people, because they hated them for whipping them. Go up there where you belong with your mob. So that's where they were going. And that was done to stop the exodus of free labour and slave labour. Luckily, they've got them back today. We've got the slaves back. We're not going to talk about that because we'll get banned.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But that's the real history of this country. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you knew the real history of what was going on, you would know that pinch gut thing was a massive monument, and that was done by original people, but not the mob from now, from way, way back. And of course, all of this stuff is part of the real history of our country that has been stolen. And of course, the original people, the problem is that there are very few people, original people, and we know most that do know this stuff. There's still some that know it, but you've got to get to the highest level of initiation to actually know this information. We know that way back, Australia was broken up into three confederations. And that meant if you're in that confederation from the Kimberley to Cape York, all the way along the coast, 300 miles inland, is called Southern Law Confederation. And everyone traded. Everyone went from one place to another. This was very fluid. There was one confederation in the middle and one up in the top in the north. And they were like a sort of sub-nations within an Australian place. So nobody really understands what happened in this country. But to say that there are earlier buildings here, yeah, we knew that. That part you're talking about, I can tell you now, the evidence is absolutely conclusive. And I've got to make the point, and I've got one here. I'm going to hold this one up. I'll hold up this particular ring, right? And I'm going to hold up that ring, which comes from Angkor Wat, and this piece that comes from Gosford, a piece of metal. Now, I'm going to tell you something about these two objects. They share one common factor, one common ingredient. We get the best science in the country. This particular piece of metal, which was found at Carrion, which is near Gosford, was analysed by Graham Lancaster, who is the head at Southern Cross University of their laboratory there, right? That particular piece of stuff has been analysed. They did this chemically. This one was done electronically. But what do they share? I can tell you, 24% of this object is made from material that is not on the periodic table and doesn't exist. This one, which is found in Angkor Wat, which is not in Australia, to show that's everywhere, 41.8%. This was done electronically, wasn't recognised on this planet. So what we've got is two objects, one found here, and by the way, two other rings were found in Australia at a place called Hill End. One was 1 metre beneath the surface and the other 4 metres beneath the surface. All, and one of those two rings, and I've got it with me now, but I'm not showing it to you right now, also has a component that's not from here.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if it's not on our periodic table, then what the hell is it?
Yeah.
It means that there's a technology going on there. And by the way, I've got to tell you something about this particular object. It's 73% aluminium and 3% copper. When they worked on this, and I'll hold up the cut, I don't know if you can see it or not, there's a cut on the edge there. When they worked on this, they got out the normal drill tip to work with aluminium. It just slid off. It didn't make a mark. They had to go to the hardest tip they had, and that's how they managed to shear a bit off to analyse. Now, I've got to make a point. This is aluminium. It's stronger than steel. Don't you think if somebody in the world had invented this, we'd be using it?
Yeah.
Because it's hardened this by a factor that you can't basically cut it. But when you put it in your hand, you can feel it's light. It's really aluminium, and it is. Now, the point is, and by the way, this is a piece of jewelry as well, this has stuff on it that we don't recognise today. This particular piece of work here, one of the ingredients of this is gallium. Now, I don't know if you know much about gallium, but it's not a product you can dig out of the ground. It's a byproduct that you can only get at 3,000 degrees when you melt either iron or aluminium. Now, 3,000 degrees Celsius, and then you get 0.1 or 0.2%. This has 6.89% gallium. It's the third largest input in this. And this is 5,000 to 10,000 years old. And you're telling me that 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, we were basically just starting to understand metal? Yet somehow or other, that process of getting gallium was found in 1879. Here it is in the ring. What that tells me is the whole of our story about the past is a fabricated lie, which is why the government appreciates our work so much.
Oh, that's a nice way to put it.
Why they ring this? I mean, if I ring National Parks and Wildlife, I get to talk to the head officer for New South Wales. It goes straight through there. So I do get a ticket to the top. And the person who sent all these letters runs the department there, and he's sent so many letters saying the same thing. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm getting at is that what we're picking up in this country is science that can't fit in a country until 1788. No one came in but so-called primitive backfellas that knew nothing about the wheel, didn't even have a bow and arrow. All they had was a stick with a point on it. They called it a spear. And in Tasmania, that mob had forgotten how to make fire. But you know, that's one of the most intelligent things they ever did. To forget how to make fire was the smartest thing a human being could do. Because what it did was, it meant in Tasmania there were 6 tribes. If your fire stick went out, you went to another tribe to light your fire. You're going to start a war with them? You're going to start a war with those 6 tribes? If you can't light a fire and your fire's out, you don't cook. You don't get warm unless you go to one of the other tribes and say, can I share your fire? Can you give us some of your fire so we can start it again? Now, people put that down as a sign of ignorance. Whitefellas read it and said, oh, look, they forgot how to make fire. And their toolkit went down to 6 items only. In Armorland, it's 128. They said, look how ignorant they've got. If they were so bloody ignorant, why was it in all the places in Australia, the ones that they had the most trouble defeating were the ones that couldn't make fire and had 6 objects they made, but they couldn't defeat them in warfare. They weren't ignorant. They
12-stranded DNA. They maintain their 12-strand DNA. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Can I ask you, just on thank you for that amazing story, by the way. That part of history I've never heard told like that. So thank you. Can I ask, like, are there any reference points, say, to the visits from the Egyptians or the Phoenicians to giants in your stories?
Because that's a very big ring that you just held up as well.
Yeah, very big ring.
Yeah. And I was
And
also
plus the bells. Do you know,
on.
Campbell? Did the bells that they confiscated had a metal in it that was not on a
yeah,
periodic
exactly.
table?
That I was thinking that it had a particular type of.
Yeah.
Here's
brass
another
that
ring.
Basically, they can't.
Look at that ring. See my finger?
Yeah.
Now, this weighs
I
over
know,
100
right?
grams. You put this on your finger, which I do, and no one else is allowed to. You put it on your finger, and the first thing it does fall around because it's weighted on the top. And secondly, it doesn't sit on your finger. And thirdly, and people said, I've got a fat finger, I can fit it in. I said, yeah, put it on for 10 minutes, mate, and your hand will get sore. And your hand
so
will get
heavy,
sore.
yeah.
Yes, we have giants. Oh, look, that's just accepted. Look, we
know.
There are little people in Australia. This is what we've got. We've got little people. We've got 3
The pygmies
types.
have disappeared.
Yeah, I know the little people are still around.
They're still around because I know they used to be actually well known. Like everyone knew that there were pygmies, but since the 70s,
not
or
pygmies.
80s,
No. There's different types. You look at. I've got pictures, and I put it up on our website. We put it up a few times of the Barinians up in near Cairns, and there were 150 of them. That was taken in 1938. And Birdsall, Joseph Birdsall's an archaeologist, 5'10". The male of the tribe stood alongside him. His head was just above his hips. But if you took him away and you looked at that person, you would swear it was like us. The body was exactly in the same configuration. It wasn't dwarf-like at all. It wasn't like that. But there were 2 other forms of little people, the hairy ones, which we know about. Then you've got the small ones, like the fairy ones, which are smaller again.
Yeah,
then when you go to the bigger ones, you've got the giants. Then you've got the Yowies. Now, the Yowies are not the giants. They're a different group again. And yes, it is well known. In fact, there's not a black fella that knows old law that would dispute the fact that we have the Yowies, which they're not really giants as such, are they?
No, they're a bit taller than us.
About 7-8 foot.
Yeah.
Don't have necks, and sort of float in and out between the curtain. They come both sides. They show themselves when they want to be seen. But yeah, look, you've got to understand, we found that being I've shown you there in a burial site, I have found a Neanderthal. I know it's a Neanderthal because it's got the square knob on the back, 1.5 centimetre square knob, which only Neanderthals have. Another skull we've got, which was analysed by experts, we thought it was Denisovan. It turned out to be an archaic Homo sapien. That's in Australia. You've got the no forehead people. You've got the three little people. You've got the robust individuals, the robust ones that have skulls thicknesses of around 2 centimetres, whereas ours is about 2 millimetres, 10 times thicker. I've got one in our room, which is, what is it, 16?
About 16, yeah.
16 thick, and it's a honeycomb skull. And what you could put a Homo sapien skull inside it and swing it around. It's much bigger. And it's called archaic Homo sapien, which means our ancestors had bigger brains than us. And I've been trying to make the point for a long time now. Of the 16 hominids that have been discovered, remember, last century there were only 2, now there's 16. We're ranked 7th on skull size. And yet we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens. Sapien means wise, wise. Always look out. When people insist something, keep repeating it.
Over and over and over.
They're lying. So, yeah, every type. What in Australia, if you listen to what the old people would tell you, my count is that there are at least 7, 8 different types of hominids here, from little to massive. And we sit in the middle. We're not the smartest. We're not the dumbest, but we're not the smartest. You've got to understand that. Whether the Tartarian race was Denisovan, and remember, Denisovans have a far bigger brain than ours, or even Neanderthal, which has a bigger brain than Denisovans. Mind you, you've got to remember, we have got a much smaller brain than both Denisovans and Neanderthal, and the story is we wiped them out. I wonder how. I mean, fair dinkum. My robust skull, if I hit that robust skull with my fist, I would break it. I mean, you can't break that skull, and they're brighter than us and bigger than us. Nothing about the past is real. Nothing. What I can tell you is that at one stage, all those other beings, all those other hominids disappeared. Why? We didn't do it. I can tell you now, we weren't smart enough. We were nowhere near smart enough. Something happened. Some major cataclysms have taken place in the past. It could be that your Tartarian story relates to Denisovans. Because you've got to remember, Denisovans were making jewelry that you would wear today 70,000 years ago that was exquisite. Did you know Neanderthals had villages with hot water systems 40,000 years ago? You know what Homo sapiens were doing then? Dribbling in caves. They were far more elegant and advanced than us. And it may well be because I've had elders tell me, oh, no, those big people were still around then. So we don't know. We don't know whether the Tartarian things we're looking at were made by Denisovans. But remember, you've got to remember this, and we have to accept it. We were never the smartest. And we are now picking up evidence. We've now found that Neanderthals matured quicker than sapiens. The young boys and girls became adults quicker than we did. And the fact you've seen the pictures of Neanderthals bent over like this, that was because the very first Neanderthal ever found was called the old man. And he had severe crippling arthritis. So they decided all Homo sapiens bent over. I can tell you now, they were as upright as us, and they were more intelligent than us, stronger than us, and we cowered in the background while they led the world. So I wouldn't be surprised if the reason why that's been wiped out is because it could be a Denisovan creation, because they surely, and the Neanderthals were making villages 40,000 years ago. We weren't. So who made this? I don't know. Yeah.
I mean,
but remember, you are part Neanderthal. You've got other genes inside you. I'm 4.7% Denisovan, which makes me 1/20th non-Homo sapiens sapien, which I'm pleased to announce. I have no problem with that. I sort of look down on you sapiens and say, one of you. Because honestly, I've looked around and I've seen very little intelligence with Homo sapiens sapiens for quite some time. Yeah, but I look back at the others in the past, And I'm going to use a quote from my elder, Kano, and he speaks about the fact that all these artifacts we have came from a time when we had more DNA. What he meant by that is we used it. We used our DNA.
Junk DNA and all that.
Junk.
Kind of stuff. Yeah.
If look, honestly, our brain works at 15%. If our liver or heart worked at 15%, we would be dead. But we are dead, brain dead, because 85% of our brain is not functioning. What Kano is saying is the stuff you're talking about. These artifacts I'm holding up, which obviously belong to giants, this comes from a time when all of us, Neanderthal, Denisovan, Sapiens, had all their genes working. And you could just imagine what bliss would have taken place if all of our brain, the parts that are just sitting there, and we call it junk DNA, that's a lie. There's no other species on the planet. Nature doesn't make junk DNA. It's a contradiction. Nature makes for each being all that they need to live effectively.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting because there used to be a saying when I was a kid called bird brain, and it was an indication you were stupid. We've now put crows. In fact, there are scientists who call the crows feathered apes because they're as intelligent as monkeys and chimps, in fact, more intelligent, but they have a tiny brain. But what people have never worked out is what if they used 100% of their brain and we only use 15%? And that's something we've got to look at. You take the hobbits in Flores, their brain size is the same as a chimpanzee, right? And about the same height too. But they had a language and they made tools. And then somebody originally, who was a Dean Falk, did some work on the hobbits' brains in Flores and found something, that the front of the brains was massively it was massive, far bigger than ours. The front of the brain, which is the cortex where all the major higher order thinking takes place, was swollen and massive. So they worked out this brain of 500 cc was probably working at 50%, which means if it was working at 50%, that's 250, and we're working at 15% at 1,300, it would have more brain working than us. It would be brighter than us. So all of our history is a lie.
It's a lie. It's absolutely a lie. And I mean, if we look, so the thing that gets us always tripped with the Australian story is the buildings in the capital cities. Like, so, I mean, like when we talk about the Egyptians arriving, and I guess that force, I guess we hear a lot in Tartaria is the Phoenicians. That would be probably
the Phoenicians. Honestly, well, they're the boat people. Let's be honest about that.
The boat people, yeah, exactly. So, they would therefore potentially be perceived as giants also. So that's an interesting look at the Phoenicians potentially. But we still have these capital cities loaded with these beautiful innate buildings that don't line up with our history books, and I so am interested to hear the response to that from our Dreamtime stories. Like, these aren't ruins. These aren't 70,000-year-old ruins. These aren't coming out of a catalyst. Like, these are literally like 100 meters from my door today is the exhibition center. Like, they were literally fully functioning structures that all our cities are made up of here in Australia. And where did they come from, and from where, and by whom? So I don't know where that timeline is sitting now within our Indigenous, and also that if we look at the truth of our history here in Australia, like, we know everything we've been told you can scrap because it's complete lies. We know that. We know that we've been programmed through education, which is all education is. We know that the lunatics asylums were just giant programming, facilities, basically. We know that cathedrals and churches were basically power stations, and that they used the frequencies of water and cymatics and sound, that those giant organs were presenting frequencies and harmonics that were healing and healthy to the realm, but could also inversely be used in its opposite duality, I guess, which is where we potentially have these hotspots in Australia of negative frequency energy killing everything left over from that time. But still we have these buildings, and we cannot figure out who is responsible for them and how they got to Australia to day, like here in our current paradigm today, not ruined.
Yeah, you mentioned before about the city in the desert that was full of, the black fellas said it was full of white fellas. Do you know what kind of people they were? Were they Phoenicians, Egyptians, or were they just?
Well, I can give you some dreaming stories. I'll give you a bit of a clue for that, can't we?
Yeah.
Just Jennifer Isaacs spoke about this. There is a very powerful myth. Yeah, it's an interesting word, myth. Normally it means it's the truth. And when you say it's come from 6:30 News, you know it's a lie.
Yep.
Anyway, there's a myth, and actually it's been written about a lot of time, but no one's got proof of the fact that up in Arnhem, in that area, there were men and women that lived there and farmed, right? And they spoke about the fact they farmed, and they spoke about the fact that they liked the women. The women were nice and peaceful, but the men they didn't like as much. They were more warlike. And a lot of people have looked for where they were. But the problem is no one can find it, but it's littered in the dreaming stories up in Arnhem of these people living there. And they go into great detail about their lifestyle, the clothes they wear, what the women were like, but the men weren't the same. They didn't trust them as much. They gave them the right to farm there. They said they were farming, but we don't do this sort of stuff. It is really specific. It's to the stage where, you know how like in when Plato spoke about Atlantis in Timaeus and Critias, and in the other book there, they said, oh, it's an allegory. It's a metaphor for Greece. And which is funny because Plato and Socrates were obsessed by telling the truth. That's all they ever did. And there's no other allegory anywhere else. Well, this is the same thing. Because when you read Plato's account, they talk about the 7 rings, and in the ring in the middle there's fresh water and everything else is salt water. It went into that sort of detail about they farmed, the clothes they wore, the buildings they created. And by the way, this was not the civilization that the people in Sydney were being aimed at. That's a different civilization again. This is what I've got to make the point. So yes, are there stories indirectly of other civilizations here? In this case, yes, not only that, but the people that were in this whatever this arrangement was, because we don't know, they were not from here. We guess from the description that they were probably from Asia. Okay, that's all we know for sure, don't we? It sort of reads like that. I think it was something like sarongs or some sort of description like that. Yeah. It gives us that impression. But what it also tells you is the original people were not adverse to other people, because like talking about it, Phoenicia, you go up to northern Queensland and there's Phoenician wharfs there, all sorts of stuff. We've been asked to go up a few times.
Serena. Yep.
They let them stay. But they said, if you want to live your lifestyle, because we know they were mining up at that place we spoke about that got blown up. That was a mining place, right?
Okay.
They let them do that. They said you can stay. So for there to be buildings that were made past that event is not an issue, because the proof is in the pudding, in the stories you've got from both in with the convicts and up in Northern Territory, that we will accept other people living here. And up at Serena, where the Phoenicians were there, and there are Phoenician religious symbols and stuff there which are very clearly belonging to them, they were allowed to live. But there was a rule. They had to live by the law of the land there, which meant there were a lot of things they could do in their own country, they couldn't do here. But those people who live there, they've come to the tribe that is stick, stone, and bone, right? So they're not going to. And they did say that these people in the Northern Territory had buildings, but no description of the buildings. Okay, so we don't know what they were. They could have been the same sort of things you're talking about in Sydney and Melbourne. We don't know for sure. And I don't know how huge that. I can tell you it was big, because I got the impression from the guys that were talking to me about this, that thing that they all saw in the desert, it's there. And why did they blow up Maralinga and stuff like that? Because I've got a strong feeling that was the area. And therefore, no one can get in there now. It's very clever, isn't it? You can't go in there. I'm pretty sure that goes together. But we don't get more than that, because you've got to remember, stick, stone, bone technology, people that don't do technology at all, they're not going to take much interest in it, and it won't become a major part of their dreaming stories. The only other dreaming story that gives you a strong indication that there was high-level activity with high-level technology is the only dreaming story in Australia that is found in every tribal region, without exception. Because all our dreaming stories are region-specific about how our tribe was made and how our land came together. But there is one story that belongs to every tribe. Now, have you heard of a place called Yukon Gorge that they blew up a couple of years in West Australia?
No.
It was a massive, it's in West Australia. It was an Aboriginal site. It's the oldest inland site in Australia, 46,000 years. And
the mining company that blew it up?
Yeah, they blew it up.
Yeah.
Do you know why they blew it up?
Because it was full of traditional art and stuff, wasn't it?
No, they did it for iron ore, but I can tell you why they blew it up. Because 4 years before, I was asked to go to the same tribe to fight for Gangamaya, which was 42,000 years old, and they're going to blow that up, right? And when I was standing there, the elder told me, Eddie McPhee, I can use his name because he asked me to come, and I did that for him. He said, this one here, this is the story of one of the seven sisters from the Pleiades. This is one of the sisters. He said, but over there's one cave that belongs to all the seven sisters from the Pleiades. And that cave was called Yukon Gorge. They blew it up. Yeah, they knew that. They knew. They'd been told that. They knew that was the Seven Sisters cave, and they blew it up.
Yeah.
And what Eddie said to me, he said this, if they blew up Yukon Gorge, George, it's going to hurt our dreaming. If they blew up, Gangamaya, but if they blow up Yukon Gorge, our dreaming is dead. So the reason I'm mentioning that is because that story of the seven sisters from the Pleiades coming to our country and landing on our country and standing on our country is in every story in Australia. And they came by what? Spaceship, right? And I remember when I was given ceremony by the Ramangiri, I had to go for a week to get this ceremony. It's not a normal one, believe me. And after it was given to me, one of the elders come up and said, how do you think we got around the world? I said, by boat. He said, what about the other way? I said, I'm not talking about that. I said, we're not going to UFOs, mate. We're not touching that at all. Of course, that's changed a lot since then. But they knew that. Notice what he was saying. What are the other ways we got around the world? Well, that's higher technology, isn't it? So, yes, it's known of Old Way by the keepers of Old Way, but not many today. But I've been given the right to give those stories, so it still remains that way. So when we talk about phenomenal technology, well, if the Pleiadians are living here, you don't think we didn't pick that up and learn from that? You don't think that was an inspiration to help us build things and create things? And that's what we're seeing around the world. They came here, and every tribe in Australia will back up what I'm going to say. They are called the Seven Sisters from the Pleiades, not from Egypt, not from America, and not from England. They're from the Pleiades, and Orion chased them. Now, the only part of the story changes is Orion, doesn't it, Evan?
That's the only part, and what Orion does or doesn't do.
Yeah. He can be a rapist, a spurned lover, something in between, and he can kidnap two of the sisters, then the main sister gets them back. There's little bits and pieces like that that change. But the general story of seven women, not men, coming to Australia, and that's where the cross of genes comes from, and coming to Australia and staying in Australia, well, what are they going to do? What do women do? Often they make babies, and that's basically what I'm getting at here. The idea of modern technology in this country goes back to the beginning of the Seven Sisters, because they came by spaceship and they stayed here. Well, what did they do when they stayed here? They imparted that knowledge, and it was a gift and a curse. And to begin with, it was taken as a gift, and then later on it was seen as a curse.
It's similar to the fallen angels almost, isn't it? You know, people bringing down technology but when you look at the technology that it was, it's like, oh, hang on, that might not have actually been that good for us.
That's what we come across. That's what our mob figured out. It took us a long time. I reckon it was a long, long time before we worked it out. But you've got to remember, Australia it's not like the rest of the world, because all of these other countries were allowed to visit, but they were never allowed to stay, and they never they never made war on us because at that stage we had magic. Until the repeating rifle, mate, there's no way you can beat a black fella unless you've got a repeating rifle in their own country. And we had magic. We could sing you to death. And we had rocks we could point at someone and put them down straight away. You can't fire a rock when they're used the wrong way or the right way, as the case may be. So we had all that stuff with us. And then we made the decision, we'll go spiritual and we'll leave that aside, because once you get too, you've got to remember something about this country, because this planet is evolving right now. In the next couple of years, it's going to evolve massively. And all the species on this planet, bar one, are welcome to stay. One is not. Humanity. Most of humanity will be banished from this planet in a couple of years because they're not welcome, because we destroyed the planet. We have to fix it. And of course, the ceremonied Uluru did fix it to an extent, but I don't know who's going to be with us and who isn't. But that belief on the Pleiades, because the belief is that the Seven Sisters put some crystals inside Uluru, which then is the way the whole planet got healed. That's another technology that healed the whole of this planet with some crystals that were placed inside a rock that healed the whole planet. That's the highest order technology you can have, planet healing technology. It's in this country. So to say that the original peoples didn't have technology is a lie. To say that the people in Australia had the technology and decided they didn't want it is the truth. So to have remains of more advanced civilizations, whether it's Tartarian, Atlantean, or Lemurian, is all the truth. And by the way, I have no doubt what you're talking about. I know, I've looked at, my friend has shown me pictures of palaces in Moscow, in Russia, where there's no heating. There's not a fireplace. And the question you ask is, all right, we could get away with it in Byron Bay. We could get away without a fireplace. But I'm sorry, when you're in Minsk, you need a fireplace 9 months of the year, and they didn't have one. And you would have died in those really cold buildings in winter if you didn't have fire. You could not have lived. I get that. I know that's there. I don't know who the mob is that belongs to those buildings, but I do know there have been many earlier civilizations, and nearly all of them have adopted technology. And nearly all of them have been destroyed by that technology. I don't know about the Tartarian mob. I don't know how they were taken out or whether they were still around at the time. I'm not sure. But to tell me that you think you found buildings that were made before us, I got skulls, I've got metal, I've got objects here, and they're all from technology we can't make today. I mean, how do you put 6.89% gallium into a ring that's been broken 3 times and was found buried at Angkor Wat, and has got to be at least 10, 12, 15,000 years old? How do you put gallium in there? Because, there's cadmium in there, there's palladium in there, there's rhodanium in there. In fact, there are 6 IUMs in that ring I'm holding up now, and all of those objects, all those elements were found in the 1800s or past that point. How do you put them all in a ring? You can't unless you've got technology at least the equal, if not better. Now, what's interesting about that ring I've held up is the coat on the outside, there is a cable inside it which is not attached to the coat. And it's 40.2% iron and 41.8%, nobody knows. And that cable is inside. This is a coating on the outside. And you'll notice it's got 2 sort of UFOs on the top of it. This is not a ring. This is a receiving device. So that's the technology. If you said, I've got a receiving device looking like that, they'd look at you and say, how does it work?
It's like a mobile phone.
Because you don't have that technology. You don't know how this works, but they do.
We call it antiquotech. That's the word that we've been using, antiquotech. All this technology that we're finding from the ancient times, Campbell.
Recent technology. But this is when we look at, the past and technology, when you see what's going on, it seems that we started with high technology that was like earth-based almost, like talking like crystals and rocks and things that aren't complex when you look at them, but they're much more powerful, and then we've just de-evolved, or we've had someone or some
It's been a mimic.
entities destroy the real stuff and mimic it into plastic, bloody, crappy
and petrochemicals and all the
exactly.
Out there. Yeah, they were definitely using rocks. You've got to understand something. Rocks are the skin of the planet. The Earth is alive, and the rocks are its skin. And you think the skin isn't alive? Well, you're wrong, because it is. So the rocks and the crystals, Atlantis and Leah, who works with us, we've lost at the moment. She's very much linked in with that. And
hello.
Oh, you are still with us. Okay, we weren't sure. Well, Leah could probably talk more about that, but she was there when the destruction took place, and it was through crystals. It was through the misuse of crystals. But don't forget this. Yes, they were more advanced in some respects, but in other respects, they were just as ignorant as we are today. Don't think we're that different. Well, and they destroyed themselves, and we're doing it in a different way. But here's the trick. The original people knew this, and that's why they walked away from it. And Australia was, like, I suppose to an extent, like a Mecca for the world, a spiritual Mecca for the world, where people would visit. You know, how you go to Mecca and you walk around that obelisk and then you walk away? It was the same here. They could come to the spiritual place and get some teaching, but then off you go. Or if you're staying over there, you stay over there. We're quarantining you. You're in lockdown. Oh, careful what we say. Okay, we're putting you there. That's your spot, and you're allowed to go there and do what you want. But it was rigorous, and it was strict, and it was agreed to. And what happened is, the more we lost religion and magic, then Australia changes from being a centre of wisdom to a backwater of primitive people that couldn't invent a bow and arrow, a wheel, an engine, and they had nothing but sticks and stones, and they thought, well, they're ignorant. But it was not so long before that this was the only place that was running on a different vibration, a different mindset.
Different radio bands, like a different resonance.
Frequency.
Well, rocks and crystals were magic then.
Yeah.
I mean, the pointing of the bone. Rubbish. It could have been a crystal. It could have been a rock, and it normally was those things. And if you pointed, I've got 4-5 killing rocks, and they can kill. If I was to use them to kill someone, and when we're being cursed, and I'm going to talk about this a lot in our next online conference, I'm going to talk about the time we've been cursed so many times and nearly killed that on one occasion I got sick of it, and I called my killing rocks into defense. And that was interesting, wasn't it, Evan?
Oh, yeah.
And we'll talk about, I'm not going to talk about that today because we'll give away too much and no one will come to our conference. But I can tell you that in the past, the rocks and crystals were as powerful as they were in Lemuria, in Atlantis, maybe in Tartaria, and they were used mainly for good, but sometimes not so. And we understood they had energy and power, and most importantly, magic. But of course, once the magic goes out of society, then original people go down the pecking order as it goes out of society. When magic reappears, then our society will come back again. And we need that, not just for white fellas, we need it for our own people, because we're having a problem in this too.
Well, which is really interesting when we look at actually what's happening today, this week here in Australia, and the parallels that have been drawn between this conversation today and what is actually taking place in our mainstream world. And we, this consciousness is blown up, but we've been locked down. People have found their sovereignty and voice, but we've been masked. People are understanding the healing properties of their own inner being, and yet everyone's been forced these, apple juice jabs. And we're in a really interesting situation. One of the conversations Campbell and I had last week was looking at Australia. I was present during the Uluru ceremonies, and looking at the energy, and from the star-seeded community around the world, the energy that flooded into Australia on that day, and the focus of it being the heart center of the world, activating that grid line for all of the plane. And then we've got this total Australia becoming like the prototype country of this rollout across the world right now of total, like all our freedoms gone, no sovereignty, total submission, please, all of that stuff. So we talked last week about Australia actually being the center of all of this.
It is.
Like it's,
it is. It's meant to be, and it was because of Uluru. And you got to remember, Leah has a guide called Mesref, which I regard in the same way I respect Kana. And he made 2 comments about this. And I remember asking him twice. And the first time he wouldn't give an answer, and I begged and got it the second time round. I said, give us some words of wisdom about how to cope. I don't want to use the word because we'll all get cut down. And he said one thing. He said, this is a gift. And people need to understand this. It's a gift. He said, if there's going to be a change, I mean, the Hopi call this the door and the hole, and they call it the fast-flowing river. The Mayans call it the 2 roads. Well, they're here. They've all said this. It's not just the original people are saying there's a change. And this is what's really important. I don't talk about the negativity of what's taking place today because we were telling people in our presentations 5 years ago there would be a pandemic. We told them this was going to happen, and it would ramp up fear and hatred and division and make people distrust each other. And I mean, and the situation we've got today is there are 2 paths available. One's about fear. One means that when I go outside the door, that virus could be in the air. That person walking near me might be carrying something that could kill me. Therefore, I fear that person. I won't touch that person. I fear the air I'm breathing. I fear the sun outside. I fear everything. They're doing this because in this time of change, and there's only a couple of years left, people, if they're going to stay on this planet, have to learn to conquer fear and never be fearful. Now, if I'm in a situation where I'm hating that person who's doing this, or I don't like that, and by the way, I want to make a point about this. This has got nothing to do with whether or not you do something with your arm. I'm talking to both groups. I'm talking to the group that say, if you don't do something, I hate you and I wish you were dead. And I'm talking to the other group that say, you people are absolute idiots. You're fools. You deserve to die because of what you're going to do to yourself. They are equally ignorant. This is not to do with medicine and this change. And some people said to me, oh, if you do this, then you don't. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, there are idiots right now that say they don't want to do something. And I don't like these people, but they're right about that. That doesn't mean they ascend because they get one thing right out of 500. What we have to learn right now, this is all about one thing. It's about not dividing yourself, not hating someone else because you think they did or didn't do something. If somebody wants to do something, I don't care. We have a philosophy, which I've been talking about a lot, and I keep using this philosophy when this brings up. Our philosophy is the word whatever. If someone comes to me and says, I'm doing this and I've done that, I just think, whatever, I don't care. That's your fine. I'm not going to make a judgment and I'm not going to react to it. And I'm not going to give out anger, fear, resentment, frustration. I'm just going to say, that's your journey. There's a lovely line in one of the prophecies we read a lot, and I think you probably know this, we read a lot of prophecies from overseas, particularly the Hopi. And one of the lines that ever means a lot is the one that says, we are the ones we've been waiting for. And I think that's one of the most important lines I've ever seen. Because if you think you want to follow someone, you're on the wrong road.
Yeah.
This is all about you yourself. And I do remember on one occasion, when we did the presentation at Uluru with Mick and Catherine Hand, which was on at the same time as what was happening at Uluru, a person that finished got up and put up their hand and said, look, most of my family think I'm an idiot, and most of my friends think I'm an idiot. How can I convince them that there's a change? How can I make them realize there's a change? And I said, you can't. I said, don't bother. Don't do it. I said, what you do is this. You do what blackfellas call seed dreaming. You tell them about this once. You tell them about where you're coming from once. And what I say to them, if they don't believe you, send them to our science, because as you know, we've got photographs of the rock exploding. We've got photographs of UFO flying over there. We've got the graph of the Schumann resonance increasing 100-fold at 732. We've got lots of evidence of things that happen around the world. Say that, get them to look at that, and that'll appease their rational mind. Now, what happens past that is they might walk past that and say, I think it's all shit. Let them go. Let them go. Down the line, that seed might sprout. It may take months to sprout, or we might have thrown it on concrete, which means it'll never sprout. But the point is, it's not your journey anymore. This is about each person on this planet deciding whether they want to live with the planet or against the planet. That's what it comes down to. Now, if you decide you want to live with the planet, then Al Pachamama becomes the first consideration in every law and every statute and everything the world does.
Yeah.
Mother comes first, we come second. If you live under those rules, you're fine. And that's what it comes down to now. You have to make a decision about how you want to live. This business with the thing that's floating around and what you do or don't do is just it's just background noise for me. Makes no difference. It's how you are as a person, how do you react to other people. And that's what this was about. Honestly, the ceremony that took place there, there were 15 to 20 million people around the world on that day, at that time, shooting their energy at that rock. And yes, we filmed it at 7. I can tell you exactly when the rock was turned on because we have the film of this massive white explosion of light that nobody saw. Only the camera picked it up, that comes out of the rock and doesn't touch the rock, and it went around the world. That was the charge that changed the planet so it begins to heal itself from within. All the animals are comfortable. They will live in this higher vibration, but this is what it comes down to. The Earth at the moment now, the Schumann resonance now, a couple of times, isn't it, Evan? More than once. It's gone up at a level they can't measure anymore. And that's what we're feeling. There'll be a time in the future, it went there once for 28 hours straight, and the world went crazy, I can tell you. There'll be time in the future where it stays there forever and never drops down. And what that means is, if your soul and your spirit's not accustomed to that, you will pass on. You can't live in it, and you can't be born back into it because you failed kindergarten, and now it's a university. Yeah. So what then happens? And people say, oh, they go to hell. I said, oh, give me a break. I said, look, think about this. My take is around 80% of the people will go. How would you feel if you were the next one on the rank and you missed out? You were 80.00001% and you missed out by that much. Does that mean that you go to the same place as Bill Gates and you get the same punishment? That sucks.
Yeah.
No, what it means is that you go to a planet that's just like kindergarten here before it ascended. And there you get your last lesson, man. The one word you said that put someone else in front of you was the last person on the boat, and you're the first one off the boat. You can't be given the same punishment as someone from the cabal. It's just not going to happen that way. So what it really is about is the Earth cleans itself of the humans that can't live here anymore. Not that don't deserve to live here, because old mate that just missed out, he was that or she was that close. Come on, that's pretty tough going, because someone's going to have to be next in line that misses out. And that group must have been awful damn close. Well, let them go to another planet, deal with 2 more issues they've got to deal with, and then they incarnate back here. And remember, if it is reincarnation, which we know is true, then it's not punishment. It's just that you went to school, you sat for the exam now, and let's be honest about this, and I'm going to be honest about it. Everyone I'm talking to, we're the dross. We haven't evolved. We've had plenty of opportunities to go to the other side and evolve. This is the whole point of it. And we didn't do it. We're all back here, every one of us. We're in 7F, 7A and B are gone. We're at the bottom of the list here. And you know what? Even now, we're in 7F. And even today, my last few lives, and a lot of my lives have been appalling. And I'm not a good chance of getting through. But the point is, if I don't, you can still come back here. There's no punishment to this. In fact, it's actually reward. Because if you come back here with the Earth vibrating at that higher level, you'll be in agony. You will not be able to cope with it. It will destroy you piece by piece. So what they're saying is, we don't want that to happen to anyone, not even the cabal. We don't want them to suffer. Nobody should make anyone suffer. So therefore, what the Earth is saying is, learn to live with me or move on. And the problem is that I know roughly within a couple of days when this changes, and I'm not going to show it. I mean, I was desperately trying to tell everyone I'm not sure this thing's going to happen. And I know that our videos went around the world, and I told everybody, I don't know if this is going to happen. I really don't think it is.
Yeah.
And I want to make a point about that. Those 15 to 20 million people made a leap of faith and wanted it to happen and believed it would happen.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to do the same thing again,
Yeah.
because I can't give anyone, I've given people in our presentations, and you've probably seen them, enough empirical evidence so they can say it's fake or maybe it isn't. It's not like a spaceship landing in front and 7 aliens walking out inside and telling us something. We don't want that, because everyone would say, yeah, I want to join the hippies and New Agers now. I get it. I'm with them. It can't be like that. And I love what we've got. Some people have said, this is amazing. Other people say, oh, it's all a load of shit. And I said, well, fine. That's fine by me. It doesn't make any difference to me, whatever. If that's what you want to take out of it, that's your road. It's not mine.
Mm.
So the moral in this story is that this planet, I thought it was unique. There was no other planet like it in the cosmos. I'm told there's 2 others. I'm told there's 2 other planets similar to ours. Well, let's make it nearly unique. It's one of 3 planets in the whole of the universe where this experiment has been carried out, where that everybody, every type of being is here, is incarnate, or is watching what's taking place here. They're all here, and they're all here for one thing, the 21st of December, because we're either going to screw it up. And the number, I knew exactly the number of people we had to have meditating. And I underestimated humanity because I never thought we'd get it. And we actually did it by tenfold. It was tenfold more than what was expected. That's why that alien spaceship, which sort of hovered over Uluru at that time, was there to confirm or deny what was going to happen. And I'll guarantee you it left at exactly the same moment that rock exploded at 7:36. I'll check the timing on that, but I'm pretty sure it's the same thing. That was the big question, what would happen? Now, some people might think, where's the proof aliens have been here? And I'm sort of like, I know we've got to close soon, but I want people to think about this. If you want the proof to see whether aliens have been here, find a mirror. Look in that mirror and look at your face, and then ask yourself 3 questions. Number 1, if I was a Labrador, what would I look like? You look like a Labrador. If I was a zebra, what would I look like? You know exactly what you're going to look like. And then you go to every animal, insect, fish, bird on this planet, and they all look virtually the same. And then you look at one species here, only one. By the way, look at the monkeys, and they all look the same. Then you go and look at the other thing that came out of the monkeys, and there are 7 billion of them, and they weigh from 40 kilos to 400 kilos. They stand from 0.5 meter to 2.5 meters. They eat anything. We all have different faces. No 2 faces are the same. Everyone looks majorly different to everyone else. Some people can run at 4Ks. Some can run at 40Ks, but all animals move at the same speed. Everything about humans, our genetics are programmed for diversity, and every other species on the planet is programmed to conformity. What is the difference? The difference is we bred with aliens. And I just showed you one alien that doesn't have a forehead. Did you know they found a hominid in Israel? Is it, Evan?
Yep, no chin.
No chin. Now, come on, no chin, no forehead. This is not right. We're all supposed to come from the same mummy and daddy, who are both monkeys, and they all have sagittal keels, and we have sutures. No. Our genes are a combination of Tartarian, Atlantean, Lemurian, alien. We are a mixing bowl of different genes, and the whole purpose of this was to find out whether we could all learn to live together. This was what they were trying to do, because believe it or not, out there, we found out out there, they're no different to us. They fight each other too. They're no different to us. We think that they're somewhere, so much far more evolved and more understanding. I remember asking them, well, they know more. They've got better technology. Surely they would understand the big picture and they'd get it. No, it's no different. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are an experiment. And just like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there is no overlord that's going to destroy this planet. It's not like that, but the planet is going to change. And the answer is not, well, I don't know. It could be 42, couldn't it, Evan?
It could be.
We're never sure about that. But the major part of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy about this being one massive alien human experiment where we're going to find the meaning to life, or maybe not the meaning to life, but something close to it. That's what this is about. The planet's ready to ascend. It's a matter of whether humans are now. And at the moment, the majority won't. But this, at the moment, what did Mesref call it? Was it brutal and ugly, didn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
He said the future, this is what the aliens are telling us, over the next couple of years will be brutal and ugly. And it has to be. If you want something that's precious, you have to earn it. It just can't be given to you. I thought it was going to be hard. I didn't know that they were that clever. It's harder than I thought it was going to be, incredibly hard on a daily basis. And we're in ground central. We're in the melting pot in Australia.
Yeah.
But remember this, it started in Australia, so therefore this has got to start in Australia too. Same thing. And they know that. And remember this also, ladies and gentlemen, for any people who think that the 21st of December last year wasn't important, can I remind you, it's on the 21st of December last year when the Pentagon made an amazing announcement. By our count, 6 hours after Uluru, and they said, we're going to investigate aliens and UFOs for the first time ever. And people kept wondering why. They know it's coming too. They know it's coming also. So, yeah, this is all part of a fascinating experiment that's been going on for an awful long time. And God, Douglas Adams, it's funny how science fiction writers sometimes can get part of the story. I mean, Star Wars is nearly, we've been told Star Wars is very, very close to what happened out there.
Yeah, I've been told Star Wars was based on books from the Vedas, and that's why we get Darth Vader and what's his name?
Yoda. Yeah.
It's based on fact. I've been told that that's a fairly strong description of what's happened.
Yeah.
And when it comes to Douglas Adams, that part's that's about the Earth. And the fact, yes, it is. I mean, he made a comedy out of it and added a few things around the edges to sort of make it more palatable. But the underlying theory of an event where there was a cutoff point, a day where, and basically what happened was they wiped everyone out. Well, it's not quite like that, but most will be. Not wiped out, just relocated. Relocated.
It's
failed.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring up Douglas Adams, because I actually think I randomly gave him one of his last interviews on Planet Earth, because I was 13, I was a kid, and he was doing a talk at our school as he was doing a literature festival, and I interviewed him for the school newspaper, and then the next day he actually died. So like I've always carried Douglas Adams and that you know, this the 42 and the whole very close to my heart, because I was like, oh my gosh, was I almost...
Well, remember that basically the underlying premise of what he said is nearly identical to what I'm saying.
Yep, absolutely.
There is very little difference in this. Really, it isn't. And I mean, I don't know if he knew that. I mean, I do know Gene Roddenberry openly admits that he was given the idea for Dr. Spock from them, because that sums up quite well what they're like. The ones who are enlightened, they came to this earth for one thing, and it's to experience love, because that's the one thing they couldn't learn properly. But everything else about Spock is very much a matter of what they're like. So a lot of these science fiction shows, they're not coincidental. The ones that actually ring and resonate with society do so because there's an underlying truth. The same way the Lord of the Rings resonates. And I should know more than anyone else on this planet, because we have those bloody rings. And all they said about them, what was written, most of it's right. They got one thing wrong, but most of what Tolkien wrote was correct about that. What Adams wrote was correct also. So sometimes...
Does that mean the Eye of Sauron is actually here in Australia? Is that where the eye of the Tolkien's beast is?
No, actually, the ring that you're talking about, I had, which is what they call the Ring of Mordor. I know it's going to sound like this comes out of the Lord of the Rings, but you ask Evan where it is and he won't know.
No idea.
I've hidden it. And I'll be honest with you, if I had a volcano, I would throw it in there because nobody can control it. I've had it on my finger longer than anyone else, and I'm damaged from it from good. I wear all the rings, and they've all worked their way into me in different ways. But that first ring, when we do it next time we talk about the magic of the rings, I'll explain fully why that ring is too dangerous for anyone to touch. It's just beyond control. Now, I've got 3 rings from Atlantis. I had one, I gave the best of the 3. I gave to 2 psychics, and one of them vomited and threw up for a week, and her cat wouldn't go near her, nor would a rabbit. The other person who touched it went into the laundry and washed herself because the evil was all over it. And that is the least dangerous of the 3 of them. The third one, which I've never worn for more than 5 minutes, I will be wearing all night sooner, and I may not be come back after that. Those rings are incredibly dangerous, and he was right. You've got to remember, Tolkien's story was based on a Swedish myth about 3 rings that ruled the world. And remember this, those rings, the first ring was buried at Hill End, 1 meter beneath the surface, 1.5 meters beneath the surface. The third ring was buried at Hill End and found by someone else, 4 meters beneath the surface. And the second ring was found in a churchyard in Scotland, buried beneath the surface. And all of them are buried. Do you know why they were buried, don't you? Because they're too dangerous. And also the Lemurian rings, and I just held up one, that's a Lemurian ring, and so is that one. And we've got others. Lemurian rings, they only tell you the truth. Atlantean rings, they lie through their teeth. They really do. I mean, it's funny, when I got the second ring, the Atlantean ring, I got it, and both Evan and my wife, because they've seen so many artifacts come through here, we've got so many of them, they both said they wanted to put it on. And I was quite shocked. That never happened before. They both said the ring said they wanted to put them on. So I asked this ring. I asked it, did they ask? It said, yeah. Did it say that? Yes. And I asked what would happen if they put it on. It said they both die. Then I asked the other ring, did you ask? Yeah. And what would happen if they put them on? Oh, I'd kill them both. It had no compunction. All 3 of the Atlantean rings have no compunction about killing, because those rings were created in enlightenment and stayed and absorbed what happened after. And it finished in destruction. So the rings carry all of that story within them. One of them, the second one, I think we've broken through with that one. I think that one now, I can wear that all the time. It won't harm me. I think I can wear the third one. I've been told I can, but the second one, I could wear it, and I did. I wore it a lot. But it's just not possible. And yes, it does take over that thing about Smeagol. It does that because one person at the beginning, and I'll tell more about the story later, one of the persons stole the first ring off me, stole it off me. And then I did things like put up on Facebook that she was going to kill Evan and I, and told everyone they were going to kill us, and did try to kill us, did try and kill us, and then lied and then deceived people and did some of the most horrible things this person's ever done, never done it before. It brought out the worst in everyone. And we had an occasion at one place where people were screaming at each other with a ring in the middle, and a group of people walking back with the ring when they took it off me, saying to other people, how will we lie to me? We have to lie and deceive to this person and steal the ring off them. It brought out the worst in every person that's been near it. And it's uncontrollable. So Tolkien was right about that ring. Evan doesn't know where it is, so if people grab him and try and find out, you can't find out.
That'll be fine.
And if they grab me, they can kill me. I don't care. I'm so old anyway, it doesn't matter. So I don't care about that. But that ring is all that Tolkien said it was. So these stories from the past that we adopt and we call them fiction are actually fact. And the stories from the present we have now that we come through the TV, they claim to be fact, but they're nearly all fiction.
Because we live in an inversion.
There's nothing now. I bought a TV program this week, and I found there was an ABC show on 8 o'clock where Aaron Pedersen, this woman, go for a walk through the bush each week for half an hour. That's the only TV we can watch all week. There's nothing else there, because if you watch it, it'll hurt you.
Yeah.
It'll hurt you. It'll hurt your head, and you'll become negative, and you'll become compliant and obedient, and you won't think as much, because they're trying to give you media now that makes your brain get smaller. And we can now prove, because we've got a Homo sapien archaic, and it's 1600 cc, we're 1300. We're getting smaller. Our brain is shrinking.
Yep. Absolutely.
And by the way, I reckon within 2 generations, if they kept watching reality TV, it'd dropped to 1200. It'd just disappeared. It'd shrivel, because nothing happens. If you don't exercise an organ, it doesn't grow.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. You know Helen, my partner, and we do carbonate, and our whole thing's regenerative ag. And one of the scientific experiments that we've been observing is that the poison that they've used on our food chain so subtly in such small increments, and which has killed the nutrition, has actually created a 21% decrease in our hippocampus. So in our forefrontal, imaginative, creative thinking faculties in our brain. So 21%, and that's just in the industrial era of food poison toxicity levels. So
it'll continue. It'll continue.
Absolutely, all by design. All by design. Yeah.
If you want to have a slave population, you've got to make sure they don't question anything. And this is one of the tests we're doing today. If people do what they're told all the time, then they're excellent. They're welcome. And if they don't, they're not. But that's a different story, and we won't touch that. You'll end up getting, if we use the wrong words here, you'll end up being chucked out. We're still recovering. We're still recovering after Uluru, because we had about, I think about 70, 80,000 people go to our website that month, and more on Facebook, and about 5,000 shares. Straight after, our numbers went down to 100.
Yeah.
200.
Yeah, of course.
And it's been like that ever since. And we only just broke through. We did an article about the rocks, and we got shocked after 4 days. It had done 50,000 people. And we realized why. Because the rocks don't seem to fit into anything, and therefore it just got through the AI.
Yeah, and we're the same with Tartaria. It's currently an uncensored topic.
Yeah, because the AI doesn't recognize it into their frames of reference of what they've got. And we've worked out now, because what I'm now doing is I'm putting up an article tomorrow on the rocks, and I'm writing down, I was going to do 12 experiences where the rock shows magic, and I only got to do 5, and I did 5,000 words. I had to stop. We're going to put that up, and that'll get through, because it's about the rocks. And then I'm going to do another article doing more of the top 10, and then I'll do more of the magic again. So for the next 4 articles, I'm doing the rock, and therefore we can get back to that number of 50, 80, 100,000 people we're getting before.
Yeah, excellent. Well, please tell the audience everything about what's coming up for you guys and how they can connect in.
Hang on, Evan.
Bring on Evan. Bring on Evan.
The next conference is coming up pretty soon. So let's have a look here. It'll be not this weekend, the weekend after. And depending on what part of Australia you're in, if you're over on the East Coast,
9 o'clock.
9 a.m. If you're over in Perth, it's a little bit hairy for you at 6 a.m. Sorry about that. America is the day before.
But good times.
Yeah, in their afternoon.
Yeah.
So that's not too bad. In the
Europe suffers.
Europe, I'm so sorry to suffer. But the beauty of the system is that there's a replay, so you could, if you're up having a midnight snack, you can watch a bit and then go back to bed and watch the rest later.
They've got a month, haven't they?
Yeah, they've got a month to rewatch it. So sorry about that, Europe and Britain. And probably sorry, Western Australia, but Australia's a big country with 3-4 different time zones, so can only do so much under those conditions.
So how do people get tickets, connect in?
Yes, so go to our alienancestry.net, and then you'll see a link to the next chapter, which is I think we're up to 14 now. So what we got here, it's so it's $26 Australian, which means if you live overseas, that's probably even better.
2 cups of coffee.
Because our dollar's not great. Yeah, so yeah, sorry. Well, yeah, I'm not in charge of the currency, but someone will do all right out of that overseas, I think. Yeah, so yeah, it'd be great to see everyone on the day. We've got a few different speakers with us on that one, so that's going to be good. We'll be doing a bit of legal stuff, bit of UFO stuff.
Evan, that was the worst plug ever, man. No, like, okay, so we got Geraldine Grace, who is a New Earth lawyer. She's going to be covering a bit about, I mean, stop me if, because this is all new territory for me, so I'm really not sure 100% what she's going to say, but she's going to be basically covering, I think, the new laws and social expectations of I don't want to call it a utopian society, but a bit better than what we've got here, and what we're expecting to have in the hopefully near future, something better and something brighter. And also we'll be having Diego Antolini from the X-Plan group. I'm not sure if people have heard of it yet. It's an Italian research group that they cover. They cover a whole bunch of different things. So it's going from like UFOs, ETs, interdimensional stuff, bizarre radiations emanating in odd places around the world.
Cool.
He actually has photos as well that he'll be showcasing, which have not been publicized yet. So we're going to be getting exclusive stuff for that. So I'm really excited about it. I've actually seen the slideshow. He sent me the slideshow the other day, and it is insane. You know how there's like this sort of this is like really, really clear photos too. And it's always funny when people come up and they say like, oh, why do all these photos and videos of ETs and UFOs look very grainy, very like, you know, it's a little too convenient that they don't actually have, you know, nothing solid. Well, sorry to say this, fellas, but Diego has clear shit. So it's really, really good. And I can't wait to see the discussions that are going to be had from that. Like also he'll be covering the development. Hang on, I can't remember the pronunciation. I'm going to butcher it. Sorry, Italian viewers, but Vomalenko Mountains, the area where they have like all the serpentine rocks underneath the rock in the caves. So it's going to be very interesting. There's some very bizarre occurrences. There's a lot of activity there. I remember some time ago, he and I were talking about it because he was doing a lot of research, his group's more recent research in that area of the mountain. And he was asking me a bunch of questions to direct to my contacts. And the response was, well, there's actually interdimensional rifts that are popping in that particular area because there's some sort of, they called it the thinning of space. Anyway, he'll be covering all of that. You know, if it's your cup of tea, which I can't imagine it wouldn't be, because you know, we're all into that. Go check it out. Check out ancestry.net, and just, you know, you'll see the whole thing on the landing page anyway. There's a lot of details and information there. So there we go. There's the link right there, and go check it out. It's gonna be pretty stellar. And then also, obviously, I'm gonna be there naturally at the very end of the show. You know,
saving the best for last.
The best for last, exactly. Like when like my makeup has like sweated off for the rest of the day and everything. I'm just like a disaster, an ugly mess as typical. But I'll be on there just because what we're doing now, like we're doing questions. So what Steve and Evan and I have been doing, we've been creating these questions so that I'm going to ask my contact Mesrith. He's already been mentioned so far. He's my main ET contact. And you know, we sometimes have conversations whenever I can get a hold of him. He doesn't answer his cell phone these days. I don't know what he's up to, you know, poor reception, I suppose, in the astral planes. I don't know. But I get responses from him, and I note it down, and then, you know, we discuss the answers basically. So go check it out. Full face of makeup, my best clothes on, we can do it.
Wow, that just sounds amazing. Oh my God, I'm so excited to connect you guys into this little audience that Campbell as Campbell's created a big audience. I'm just in the sort of like tip of it at the moment, but it'll be so great to get these two worlds talking, communicating. So much overlapping, and gosh, it's been a total pleasure to communicate with you guys today. Like, thank you so much for the honor of your company and your presence, and being able to have this sort of open dialogue with such, like, I just love being able to actually speak freely about everything that we want to talk about, and everyone's capable of doing that, and it's amazing. And so thank you so much from
Thank
me,
you, Karen.
Pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
pleasure.
No worries. Thanks
Guys,
a lot.
definitely.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
We'll be putting this over our channels, and I'll send you the recording, and you can use it as you will if you want to, and we'll let you know how it goes. And I hope that you guys get a big hit from our audience for
Awesome.
the
Thank you.
conference coming up. So gratitude and honor, my friends.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful, and thank you, and we will speak to you soon.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a
All
lot.
right, guys. Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
See you
See ya.
guys.
Bye. Come talk to me.